Star Hunter by Andre Norton, Chapter 13. He lay against a rock, and it was quiet again, except for a small whimpering sound which hurt, joined with the eating pain in his side. Vi turned his head, smelled burned cloth and flesh. Cautiously he tried to move, bring his hand across his body to the belt at his waist. One small part of his mind was very clear. If he could get his fingers to the packet there, and the contents of the packet to his mouth, the pain would go away, and maybe he could slip back into the darkness again. Somehow he did it. Pulled the packet out of its container pouch, worked the fingers of his one usable hand until he shredded open the end of the covering. The tablets inside spilled out, but he had 3 or 4 of them in his grasp. Laboriously he brought his hand up, mouthed them all together, chewing their bitterness, swallowing them as best he could without water. Water, the lake. For a moment he was back in time, feeling for the water bulbs he should be carrying. Then the incautious movement of his questing fingers brought a sudden stab of raw, red agony, and he moaned. The tablets worked, but he did not slide back into unconsciousness again, as the throbbing torture became something remote and untroubling. With his good arm, he braced himself against the cliff, managed to sit up. Sun flashed on the metal barrel of a needler which lay in the trampled dust between him and another figure, still very still, with a pool of blood about the head. Vi waited for a steadying breath or two, then started the infinitely long journey of several feet which separated him from Hume. He was panting heavily when he crawled close enough to touch the hunter. Hume's face, cheek down in the now sodden dust, was dabbled with congealing blood. As Vi turned the hunter's head, it rolled limply. The other side was a mass of blood and dust, too thick to afford Vi any idea of how serious a hurt Hume had taken. But he was still alive. With his good hand, Vi thrust his numb and useless left one into the front of his belt. Then, awkwardly, he tried to tend Hume. After a close inspection, he thought that the mass of blood had come from a ragged tear in the scalp above the temple, and the bone beneath had escaped damage. From Hume's own first aid pack, he crushed tablets into the other's slack mouth, hoping they would dissolve if the hunter could not swallow. Then he relaxed against the cliff to wait, for what he could not have said. Wasp's party had gone on into the valley. When Vi turned his head to look down the slope, he could see nothing of them. They must have tried to push on to the lake. The flitter was at the top of the cliff, as far out of his reach now as if it were in planetary orbit. There was only the hope that a rescue party from the safari camp might come. Hume had set the directional beam on the flyer, when he had brought her down, to serve as a beacon for the patrol, if and when Starnes was lucky enough to contact a cruiser. Hume's mouth moved, cracked the drying, bloody mask on his lips and chin. His eyes blinked open, and he lay staring up at the sky. Hume. Vi was startled at the sound of his own voice, so thready and weak, and by the fact that he found it difficult to speak at all. The other's head turned. Now the eyes were on him, and there was a spark of awareness in them. Was? The whisper was as strained as his own had been. In there. Vi's hand lifted from Hume's chest, indicating the valley. Not good. Hume blinked again. How bad? His attention was not for his own hurt. His eyes searched Vi, and the latter glanced down at his side. By some chance, perhaps because of his struggle with Peak, Wasp's beam had not struck true, the main core of the bolt passing between his arm and his side, burning both. How deeply he could not tell. In fact, he did not want to find out. It was enough that the tablets had banished the pain now. Seared a little, he said. You've a bad cut on your head. Hume frowned. Can we make the flitter? Vi moved, then relaxed quickly into his former position. Not now, he evaded, knowing that neither of them would be able to take that climb. Beam on? Hume repeated Vi's thoughts of moments before. Patrol coming? Yes, eventually the patrol would come. But when? Hours? Days? Time was their enemy now. He did not have to say any of that. They both knew. Needler. Hume's head had turned in the other direction. Now his hand pointed waveringly to the weapon in the dust. They won't be back, Vi stated the obvious. Those others had been caught in the trap. The odds on their return without aid were very high. Needler. Hume repeated more firmly, and tried to sit up, falling back with a sharp intake of breath. Vi edged around, stretched out his leg, and scraped the toe of his boot into the loop of the carrying sling, drawing the weapon up to where he could get his hand on it. As he steadied it across his knee, Hume spoke again. Watch for trouble. They all went in, Vi protested. But Hume's eyes had closed again. Trouble, maybe. His voice trailed off. Vi rested his hand on the stock of the needler. Ooh! That beast wail, as they had heard it in the valley. Somewhere from the wood. Vi brought the needler around, so that the sights pointed in that direction. There, death might be hunting, but there was nothing he could do. A scream, filled with all the agony of a man in torment, caught up on the echoes of that other cry. Vi sighted a wild waving of bushes. A figure, very small and far away, crawled into the open on hands and knees and then crumpled into only a shadowy blot on the moss. Again the beast's cry, and a shouting. Vi watched a second man back out of the trees, still facing whatever pursued him. He caught the glint of sun on what must be a ray tube. Leaves crisped into a black hole. Curls of smoke arose along the path of that blast. The man kept on backing, past the inert body of his companion, glancing now and then over his shoulder at the slope up which he was making a slow but steady way. He no longer rayed the bush, but there was the crackle of a small fire outlining the ragged hole his beam had cut. Back 2 strides, 3. Then he turned, made a quick dash, again facing around after he had gained some yards in the open. Vi saw now it was Was. Another dash and an about face, but this time to confront the enemy. There were 3 of them, as monstrous as those Vi and Hume had fought in the same place, and one of them was wounded, swinging a charred forepaw before it, and giving voice to a wild frenzy of roars. Was leveled the ray tube, centered sights on the beast nearest to him. The man hammered at the firing button with the flat of his other hand, and almost paid for that second of distraction with his life, for the creature made one of those lightning-swift dashes Vi had so luckily escaped. The clawed forepaw tore a strip from the shoulder of Wasp's tunic, left sprouting red furrows behind, but the man had thrown the useless tube into his face, was now running for the gap. Vi held the needler braced against his knee to fire. He saw the dart quiver in the upper arm of the beast, and it halted to pull out that sliver of dangerously poisoned metal, crumpled it into a tight twist. Vi continued to fire, never sure of his aim, but seeing those slivers go home in thick legs, in outstretched forelimbs, in wide, pendulous bellies. Then there were 3 blue shapes lying on the slope behind the man running straight for the gap. Was hit the invisible barrier full force, was hurled back to lie gasping on the turf, but already raising himself to crawl again to the gateway he saw and could not believe was barred. Vi closed his eyes. He was very tired now, tired and sleepy. Maybe the pain pills were bringing the secondary form of relief. But he could hear, just beyond, the man who beat at that unseen curtain, first in anger and fear, and then just in fear, until the fear was a lonesome crying that went on and on, until even that last feeble assault on the barrier failed. We have here the tape report of Ross Hume, out hunter of the guild. Vi watched the officer in the black and silver of the patrol, a black and silver modified with a small green eye badge of XT, with level and hostile gaze. Then you know the story. He was going to make no additions nor explanations. Maybe Hume had cleared him. All right, that was all he would ask, to be free to go his way and forget about Jumala and Ras Hume. He had not seen the hunter since they had both been loaded into the patrol flitter in the gap. Was had come out of the valley, a witless, dazed creature, still under the mental influence of whoever or whatever had set that trap. As far as Vi knew, the Veep had not yet recovered his full senses. He might never do so. And if Hume had not dictated that confession to damn himself before the patrol, he might have escaped. They could suspect, but they would have had no proof. You continue to refuse to tape? The officer favored him with one of the closed-jaw looks Vi had often seen on the face of authority. I have my rights. You have the right to claim victim compensation, a good compensation, Lansor. Vi shrugged and then winced at a warning from the tender skin over ribs. I make no claim and no tape, he repeated, and he intended to go on saying that as long as they asked him. This was the second visit in 2 days, and he was getting a little tired of it all. Perhaps he should do as prudence dictated and demand to be returned to Nahuatl. Only his odd, unexplainable desire to at least see Hume kept him from making the request they would have to honor. You had better reconsider, authority resumed. Rights of person, Vi almost grinned as he recited that. For the first time in his pushed-around life, he could use that particular phrase and make it stick. He thought there was a sour twist to the officer's mouth, but the other still retained his impersonal tone as he spoke into the intership comm. He refused to make a tape. Vi waited for the other's next move. This should mark the end of their interview. But instead the officer appeared to relax the restraint of his official manner. He brought a Vivroot case from an inner pocket, offered a choice of contents to Vi, who gave an instant and suspicious refusal by shake of head. The officer selected one of the small tube, snapped off the protecto nib, and set it between his lips for a satisfying and lengthy pull. Then the panel of the cabin door pushed open, and Vi sat up with a jerk as Ras Hume, his head banded with a skin core covering, entered. The officer waved his hand at Vi with the air of one turning over a problem. You were entirely right, and he's all yours, Hume. Vi looked from one to the other. With Hume's tape in official hands, why wasn't the hunter under restraint? Unless, because they were aboard the patrol cruiser, the officers didn't think a closer confinement was necessary. Yet, the hunter wasn't acting the role of prisoner very well. In fact, he perched on a wall-flip seat with the ease of one completely at home, accepted the Vivroot Vi had refused. So you won't make a tape? He asked cheerfully. You act as if you want me to. Vi was so completely baffled by this odd turn of action that his voice came out almost plaintively. Seeing as how a great deal of time and effort went into placing you in the position where you could give us that tape, I must admit some disappointment. Give us, Vi echoed. The officer removed the Vivroot from between his lips. Tell him the whole sad story, Hume. But Vi began to guess. Life in the Starfall, or its port drift, either sharpened the wits or deadened them. Vi's had suffered the burnishing process. A setup? A setup, Hume agreed. Then he glanced at the patrol officer a little defensively. I might as well tell the whole truth. This didn't quite begin on the right side of the law. I had my reasons for wanting to make trouble for the Kogan estate, only not because of the credits involved. He moved his plastiflesh hand. When I found that LB from the Largo Drift and saw the possibilities, did a little daydreaming, I worked out this scheme. But I'm a guild man, and, as it happens, I want to stay one. So I reported to one of the masters and told him the whole story, why I hadn't taped on the records my discovery on Jumala. When he passed along the news of the LB to the patrol, he also suggested that there might be room for fraud along the way I had thought it out. That started a chain reaction. It happened that the patrol wanted Was, but he was too big and slick to be caught in a case which couldn't be broken in court. they thought that here was just the bait he might snap at, and I was the one to offer it to him. He could check on me, learn that I had excellent reason to do what I said I was doing. So I went to him with my story, and he liked it. We made the plan work just as I had outlined it, and he planted Rovold on me as a check. But I didn't know Yaktisi was a plant also. The patrol officer smiled. Insurance. He waved the Vivrut. Just insurance. What we didn't foresee was this complicating alien trouble. You were to be collected as a castaway, brought back to the center, and then, once WAS was firmly enmeshed, the patrol would blow the whole thing wide open. Now, we do have WAS. With your tape, we'll have him for good, subject to complete reconditioning. But we also have an XT puzzle, which will keep the services busy for some time. And we would like your tape. Vi watched Hume narrowly. Then you're an agent? Hume shook his head. No, just what I said I am. An out-hunter who happened to come into some knowledge that will assist in straightening out a few crooked quirks in several systems. I have no love for the Kogan clan, but to help bring down a Veep of WASP measure does aid in reinstating one's self-esteem. This victim compensation, I could claim it, even though the deal was a setup? You'll have first call on WAS assets. He has plenty invested in legitimate enterprises, though we'll probably never locate all his hidden funds. But everything we can get open title to will be impounded. Have something to do with your share? Inquired the officer. Yes. Hume was smiling subtly. He was a different man from the one Vi had known on Jumala. Premium for the guild is 1,000 credits down, 2,000 for training, and say another for about the best field outfit you can buy. That'll give you maybe another 2,000 or 3,000 to save for your honorable retirement. How did you know? Vi began, and then had to laugh in spite of himself as Hume replied. I didn't. Good guess, eh? Well, zoom out your recorder, Commander. I think you're going to have some very free speech now. He got to his feet. You know, the guild has a stake in this alien discovery. We may just find that we haven't seen the last of that valley after all, recruit. He was gone, and Vi, eager to have the past done with and the future beginning, reached for the dictation mic. End of chapter 13. End of Star Hunter by Andre Norton.